Welcome back. Well, people have spent decades now seeking new frontiers amid the depths of space. It all started in 1957 when the then Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite. The US President John F. Kennedy announced the United States' plans to send man to the moon in 1961, and that started a space race between Cold War rivals, the US and the Soviet Union. The states crossed the finishing line first, Neil Armstrong famously setting man's first foot on the moon, the date July the 20th, 1969.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
But human lunar exploration came to an end in 1972, and no country has sent people there since. Humans still go into space, though. The US, Russia and China have active programs for sending people into outer orbit, and 5 space agencies collaborate on the International Space Station, which is currently home to 3 people. We have 3 guests. Let's return to them. In Amsterdam, Mark HEPPENER, Head of Science and Applications at the European Space Agency. In London, Dr. Robert MASSEY from the Royal Astronomical Society. And from the American capital, Robert Parker, Physics Professor at the University of Maryland. Robert MASSEY, you first of all. We're talking about going to Mars. We were looking back at trips to the moon. Shouldn't we be more adventurous and be looking outside the solar system?
Well, much as I would love to advocate that, we're really quite a long way from being able to do that. I mean, you know, when you consider the long-term effects of traveling huge distances and experiments like the one we're talking about, you know, being sealed up with a group of people for 500 days, gives you some measure of the kind of robust person you have to be. If you talk about going beyond the solar system, you're talking years and years, and frankly, to get to the nearest star would take literally thousands of years.
Yeah, but my question was not about whether humans should necessarily be going there, but whether humans on Earth should be using their money to find machines that can look for life outside the solar system.
To an extent, that's happening with the flotilla of telescopes that are likely to be launched in the next few years. The European Space Agency's Darwin mission is a brilliant example of that. The very large telescope down in Chile and the overwhelmingly large telescope that's proposed are actually things that part of their agenda is to look for planets around other stars. And the aim is to be able to see a planet the size of the Earth separate from its star, and then use spectroscopy to analyze the light to see if we can see things like water vapor. That's actually a very serious scientific undertaking right now, and if we were able to find lots of water vapor, lots of free oxygen, and perhaps even chlorophyll, we might be at the point, assuming that life on another planet is like life on Earth, where we could detect life.
Mark HEPPENER,
without having to go there.
When we're talking about Mars, it is relatively close in terms of the universe. Are we not perhaps being a little bit parochial?
Well, I wouldn't be able to answer that, actually. I think this is a very good objective to go to, but I would like to emphasize that it's really more than science. This is a human endeavor, which by incidence will certainly not be isolated to one single nation. It will be a global endeavor where all space agencies probably will participate. And I think it is something that really will stimulate the minds of people, just like the first picture taken from the lunar orbit back to Earth by man. I mean, you see that picture was taken before by our robots, and that picture did not really create the enthusiasm that the man-made picture made. Voyager, the unmanned capsule that is actually leaving the solar system right now, you talk about the first man-made object leaving the solar system. It is really about humankind being interested in its environment, and indeed this environment is getting bigger and bigger.
Robert Parker in Washington, D.C., that is the point really, isn't it? It's not about money, it's not about practicalities, it is about going where no man has gone before.
It's about adventure, but the great adventure, it's so old-fashioned. The great adventure of our time is to explore where no human can possibly set foot, and we're doing that right now. Our robots have visited every planet in the solar system, and human beings haven't gotten beyond our own moon. I mean, this is incredible. It's an old-fashioned view of exploration. It doesn't belong in this century.
You're a physics professor. If you were young enough, if you were qualified enough to be an astronaut, would you go on this mission?
Oh, sure.
I thought that would be your answer. It's too good to turn down, isn't it?
It's too good to turn down, but it wouldn't be fair to the rest of people on Earth that we left behind. With the robot, with the little rovers that are now on Mars, it's very democratic. Everybody's a part of it. Everybody gets the same view of Mars. And you can go on the web right now and find out what those rovers are seeing today. It's an incredible way to do exploration, unlike this silly idea of single human beings roaming off around the world. If Columbus had had a drone, he would have sent the drone first.
Well, Mark Heppner, you would get everlasting fame if you were to go, or if you're one of the successful candidates, the world will never forget you. Will you get rich out of it? What's the pay like?
Well, for this, if you ask me, for this simulation, we are actually not paying a big amount of money. We are paying the amount that any volunteer in a medical experiment would receive, which would boil down to something like, if I calculate in dollars, around $150 per day. May I also comment a bit on Mr. Park's comments before? I think it's really essential to note that finding life on Mars is not just a matter of picking up some rocks. We already know by now that life on Mars is probably not to be found on the surface, but below the surface. In the end, there are already now geologists who say you should make drills of maybe 100 meters, maybe more, under the surface. That's a technology that is not available today to do that on a robotic mission. Okay. If it were, I'm sure that big oil companies would use it as well.
Robert Massey, throwing forward to when it might become reality, when they might try to do it for real, will they be able to do it? Will man go to Mars?
I think so, but I think you're still looking at several decades away, just the logistics, the cost. When we overcome some of those problems, then I'm pretty certain that we'll go there. But I just suspect the timescale is slightly longer than most of the space agencies would suggest. You know, I'd be really surprised if we saw it before the 2030s, and you know, it might even be somewhat later than that. It just simply is a very long way to go, a very expensive undertaking. You need some extremely resilient people to go on a mission like that. You know, I mean, frankly, I wouldn't sign up for this 500-day experiment because I suspect that I wouldn't be the right sort of person to do it.
None of us, perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps if those things are overcome, the middle of the century we'll get there.
And after Mars?
And after Mars, well, that's an interesting question. I mean, there are always abstract plans to go off and explore the whole of the solar system, to go to the asteroid belt, to go on to the moons of the giant planets and so on. But obviously, the further you go, the harder it gets. You really need some way of getting around the solar system a lot faster, because at the moment, the systems we have, when you're talking about missions that last years, it's a lot to ask for people to do that. Even if you can send all the supplies with them, you really need to be getting the journey time down, and then it will be more realistic.
Extraordinary people, extraordinary projects. Thank you all, gentlemen, very much for joining us. And if you out there think you've got the credentials for the Mars 500 experiment, you can find out more by emailing this address, mars500@esa.int. Thanks for watching.